So let's continue our discussion of industries in the West, and let's recall the way modern historians have recast westward movement. That is, they see westward movement as driven by big business, by the expansion of commerce, and of course the engine that's propelling this movement west is the pursuit of profit. Now, one thing I want to emphasize here is that the nature of industries in the West are mostly different from those in the East and perhaps even the Midwest. In a city like Chicago, Chicago became known as, a meatpacking industry. But then you have other places like Pittsburgh, the steel industry. You have, New York, and there's various industries in New York, the garment industry, so on and so forth. Okay. In the East Coast and in the Midwest, you have actual factories. I have to say, the nature of the industries in the West, it's less about factories, that is to say, laborers housed within one building known as the factory. Rather, you see scenes like this as depicted here in this slide. Laborers working on the fields, here's agribusiness, perhaps, mining and even the railroad work, right? So it's a different type of industry, but needless to say, it's still industry. Okay, it's still part of the so-called Industrial Revolution that explodes after the Civil War. Now, we've been discussing the nature of agribusiness, which is a major innovation in, big business. And what we see happening is, as I described, this transition of, the United States being composed mostly of family farms, to that by the 19th century of agribusiness taking over those smaller family farms. Okay, so this is indeed an agricultural revolution that transformed American farm life. And it's spurred by technology. You had the invention of a new plow, and then eventually those plows will be replaced by steam plows and eventually gasoline tractors, okay, which is, what does the plowing today. And all these technologies are going to cut the time and labor significantly and basically enabling just vast tracts of land to be farmed. Okay, so what you have happening is technology replacing human muscle, right? And that leads to the family farm dying, because it's giving way to specialized commercial farming, just like we see here, and just like it is today. As I mentioned, the food that we eat, sure, there's that immigrant labor, mostly immigrant labor, that's associated with that, but still, nonetheless, it is big business. It's a corporation that's producing that food we eat. Now, one thing I want to emphasize also is, and this dovetails with the notion of big business expanding west, that the market intervenes, okay? What happens is the market is the intermediary between, let's say, the person who needs food, essentially, right, and the food that we need to sustain life, okay? So the market intervenes whenever we eat, right? Now, compare that with a small family farm. Well, the way you eat is you pick some crops and perhaps, slaughter some livestock, right? Slaughter a chicken, what have you, and then you cook your meal. Now, with agribusiness, you have the market that intervenes. And needs to say, today, right, we go to a grocery store. That's a market, right? A restaurant, perhaps a drive-through. Rather than homegrown food, right? And you pay with your money or your card, and you get that food with a market transaction. Okay, what's ironic about this is the beginning of, corporate controlled food, and much of it is processed. The irony is that, many people are repudiating this, disavowing the intervention of the market, and they pay more money, right, in a store like Whole Foods, right, to get that supposed, let's just call it farm to table, right, or getting rid as much as you can the corporate influence in the food, but you're paying more in that market transaction, right? Okay, so that's one industry. Another industry is the railroad industry. Now, this is a major technological feat that occurs in the 19th century, and I mentioned that it was an actual project overseen by the federal government itself. And it basically transformed the country. This is a technological wonder that happened, transforming not just the West, but the whole country. What's happening here, if anything, it's intensifying that connection between East and West. Let's remember, the West was not detached from the East, as we acknowledged earlier. Now, to understand how significant this is, before the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, and the first one that actually was completed happened in 1869, but before that, places like, California, Arizona, or what have you, they were hard places to get to. Migrants had to come by wagon train, manufactured goods, right? From the eastern U.S., they had to arrive by ship. This is before the Panama Canal, so, those ships had to sail around the tip of South America, believe it or not, right? Around Argentina and Chile, and then end up, let's say, in California and San Francisco or what have you. So, obviously, the way to remedy this geographic problem is to build that transcontinental railroad. And indeed, Congress passed a bill that made its construction possible. And at the same time, as I also mentioned, it gave the best land in the West to these railroad companies. And you would have this railroad spanning the entire continent again by the late 1860s. And after that, people were now able to travel to the West regularly. And indeed, it became cheap once you see competition, different railroad companies competing with each other. You see the railroad rates drop, and it comes to the point where people with financial wherewithal, people with money, actually were able to travel from East Coast to West Coast just for leisure, sightseeing as we call it. And as you can imagine, this was not even possible before the invention of the Transcontinental Railroad. What the railroad did is allow this intense transport and movement and migration of not only people, but also of capital, of commodities, of ideas even, okay, certainly of labor, human labor, right, back and forth. This technological innovation is crucial for the modernization of the United States. We're talking about a modern transportation technology. Compare that with pre-modern technology. Actually, I don't think it could hardly be called a technology, right? The horse and wagon, right? Travel by horseback, right? Compare that with the railroad and this train that's powered by steam, right? And eventually you're going to see automobiles, right? Powered by fuel. All right, so this is all modern stuff, and the railroad is leading to this modernization. In fact, it transforms the way you think of time and space. Okay, believe it or not. Scholars call this time-space compression. And this is the case where in the mode of encounter with the world, right, human beings, in the pre-modern age, the way you thought about time and space is drastically different from the modern era with all this technological innovation, with things like trains and eventually automobiles and, needless to say, jets, right? The way you think about distance, time, it becomes compressed, right? Now you could travel halfway across the world in just 10, 12 hours, whereas before it took a few months, right, on a ship. So this is what's happening in the human experience, in their everyday experience with the world. Time and space becomes more compressed with these modern technologies.